Welcome back to this week's From the Bridge. I'm the captain of FishBait Marketing and your host, Rick Jones. Today we're going to spend a little bit more time finishing our discussion on fit and why fit is so important as a foundational element of sponsorship. We're also going to hear from our guest angler, Mike Millay, who is my other partner at Engagement Partners. We heard in our first episode from Mike's son, David, who's our third partner. I like to refer to Mike as an operational savant, and I'm sure you're going to learn a lot from Mike. But first, let's dive back into fit. In our last session, we talked a great deal about demographical differences in our society today. We talked about the 5 different unique generations that are in the marketplace. But forget demographics for a minute, and let's talk about psychographics. It's not how old you are, it's how old you feel you are. It's a society made up of all kinds of differences in the way we live our lifestyles. You know, one of the things that I believe was a big mistake in America was when we eliminated the draft. And I benefited from that. I was the last group that actually had a lottery number, a draft lottery number. And the Vietnam War was ending, and my generation, my class, none of us got drafted. I remember the year before, I was born on March 6, 1954. The year before, March 6, 1953, the lottery number was number 4. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's going to be great. Mathematically, I'll have an easy time next year. I'll get a high number. Well, my birthday, March 6, 1954, was number 2. So if they had drafted anybody, I would have certainly gone. But they didn't that year. But let me tell you one of the reasons I feel like we failed as a society when we eliminated the draft is one of the things that the draft did was it allowed the haves and the have-nots to have to learn to respect one another. Today, we really don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And we all lived in these vertical bubbles. We just hang out with people that think like us, look like us, talk like us. They're politically like us. They're socially like us. They're economically like us. That's very dangerous. We've lost our sense of empathy, I think, in America today. We're made up of so many different ethnic groups. We're made up of men and women. We're made up of people with different sexual orientations. And yet we've seemed to have lost our respect for our differences. I think I've told you before, one of my favorite foods is gumbo. What makes gumbo great is all the different ingredients that go in the gumbo. And that's what I think makes America great is the differences of our people. And we need to begin to respect the differences in them. And so we've got, a variety of target audiences out there, again, generationally or psychographically for properties and sponsoring brands alike. But the next criteria is that old thing we call money. Namely, does the sponsor have the financial resources to actually foot the bill? Not only do they have the money to pay a rights fee, but do they have the resources, both the financial and human capital resources, to activate their sponsorships appropriately? And finally, there's this intangible we call culture. Do the business cultures of both the property and the sponsor align? Do they like each other enough to get married? Because the truth is that a meaningful sponsorship is exactly like a marriage, with gives and takes alike. Cultural alignment is one of the most critical elements of fit. So let me give you a few examples of both good and bad fits. Let's start with some good ones. We've previously mentioned our client Warner Ladder in March Madness. It's a perfect fit. Warner's number 1 in ladders. They make and sell more ladders than anybody else. And March Madness is the number 1 event in college basketball. A perfect fit. Warner is actually on the court with the specially designed product. A few years ago, we did a study where we weighed and measured teams that actually will potentially climb the ladder and cut down the nets. And so we built a ladder that's different. It's got broader steps for bigger feet. It's a 9-foot podium ladder. You can't buy a 9-foot podium ladder. But that 9-foot ladder makes it easy to cut down the nets. It also makes it very easy for you to see our logo on national television. The ladder is such a metaphor for teams. You know, to succeed as a team, you have to climb the ladder of success one rung or one step at a time. Because, folks, success is not an escalator. It's a ladder, and it takes that effort. And interestingly, when you climb the ladder to cut down the nets, the very last person that does that is the head coach. And if you think about ladders don't do anything by themselves. Ladders are tools to greatness. And coaches don't get to play. They are tools or provide tools for their teams to be successful. So Warner and March Madness is a perfect fit. Here's another great fit. College football game day built by the Home Depot. College football game day attracts men. Home Depot wants to reach men. They want to reach men in the fall. They want to reach men early on Saturday mornings right before they head to their home improvement stores to prepare for their home improvement projects. They also want to be in an environment without clutter where they can dominate. And they have appropriate branding and activation elements. They're now, I think, in their 22nd year of sponsoring game day. And the reason is it's a perfect fit and continues to be a perfect fit. Here's another one. Our client Budweiser has a partnership with the Country Music Association's CMA Festival. Budweiser is the quintessential American lager, and this is the quintessential American music festival. It's a perfect marriage between two brands. And here's a recent one I really appreciated. I went to Jazz Fest, and AARP sponsored the Rhythm Porium at Jazz Fest this year for the first time. It was a place where musicians signed autographs. It was a place where they served wine and they sold CDs. Now, why is that a perfect fit and a perfect activation? Well, if you go to Jazz Fest, you find lots and lots and lots of baby boomers who actually drink a lot of wine and still use CDs. And they like to talk to musicians. A lot of the young people who were there were snickering, but we baby boomers liked it. And we're the target audience for AARP. Now let's talk about some bad fits. Here's one very recently from the world of major sports advertising. And this was Burger King and the Super Bowl. Burger King ran an ad that showed Andy Warhol eating a hamburger. The creative elites absolutely loved that spot. Andy Warhol eating a hamburger. Now, here's what I'd like to challenge you to do today. Go to any Burger King in the country and sit in their parking lot for about 4 hours and watch who comes and goes out of Burger King. Burger King depends on 21-year-old, lower-educated males that eat there 7, 8, 9 times a week. That particular target audience has no idea who the hell Andy Warhol is and doesn't care. This was a classic case of being intellectually clever and being ridiculous about the fit. You know, ultimately, the fans kind of determine the fit. Fans get the fit. With no fit, there's no foundation. And ultimately, there's no fun. It's now time for the Tuesday tip. We've just celebrated Memorial Day. Memorial Day reminds us that freedom has never been free. That Americans from all backgrounds, from all communities, and all walks of life have made the ultimate sacrifice of laying down their lives so we can enjoy our freedoms and our way of life. This week, make it a priority to thank someone in the military or someone who has served all of us so well. It's now time for our guest angler. Today's guest is my other partner and engagement partner is Mike Millay. Mike is one of my oldest friends, and we are delighted to now have the chance to work together. Before becoming a managing partner in engagement, Mike worked over 20 years at the Walt Disney World, running the Disney and now ESPN Wide World of Sports Complex, which is the world's largest sports participation complex. As I previously said, I like to call Mike an operational savant because of all of the things he learned and applied at Disney. Mike also was the founder of the New Orleans Sports Commission after getting his master's degree in sports administration from Ohio University. Mike is a diehard LSU fan where he wrestled as an undergraduate student. In addition to his role at engagement, Mike also runs Clancy Sports, the leading sports tourism consultancy in the country, and is a partner at Threedimensional Sports, which trains youth coaches in all areas of excellence. Let's welcome Mike to the show. Mike, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, Rick. Good to be on the ship.
We had the chance to have David on our inaugural show, and he kind of told us why he wanted to create engagement partners. Give us your version.
Well, it's funny. I'm now 63, and college sports has always been really, I think, my favorite sector of the sports industry. There's many a time when I wish I would have gone into college athletics just because I love really the purity of where competition goes there. Although I think it's dramatically changed over the last probably 10 years with the large sums of money that are being paid by broadcast and the changing landscape of college sports. So part of the reason that it interested me was because one, I think my 20 years of corporate America with the Walt Disney Company, specifically in the sports space, I felt there was elements that I learned from being surrounded by a lot of smart people that I thought I could lend some insights and hopefully make an imprint on the sector that I just really love so much. I love college football, love college basketball, love track and field, love wrestling. So I really enjoy college sports.
Mike, why do you think so many colleges are not doing a great job of engaging fans?
Well, I think they've to some degree have been blinded by the dollars. Listen. I think at the smaller schools, I still think they desperately try to do that because they don't have the large budget. So I think, quite honestly, a lot of ADs in smaller schools tend to have to work harder because they have less. But I think at the large, the Power Five and even probably the next tier down, they're caught up in a game of catching up to their competitor. If this school builds this, then I've got to build that. If they build this locker room, I've got to do that. If they pay this much for a coach, I've got to do that. So it feels like we've got a bunch of followers and not as many leaders who are going to take a stand and make some real changes. I know it's not easy because, leading is tough to begin with, but to making such a quantum change, I think if not, we're going to see a lot less sports on the college campuses, and it's going to be turning into football and potentially basketball factories at some schools.
And I think that would be a tragedy. One of the beauties of college athletics is the fact that it gives so many student athletes a chance to compete in so many different sports. But yeah, we seem to be focusing on the revenue producing sports, maybe to the detriment of some of the other sports. I found that the colleges tend to live in a bubble, and they tend to benchmark only themselves. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to create engagement partners was the ability to bring thinking outside of the collegiate space, to them, so that they're not just comparing themselves to each other. Talk a little bit about your Disney experience and some of the things that you learned there that it translates well to the collegiate space.
Well, I think there's actually there's a lot of parallels in that, college sports, and if you think of big time football, it really is about that game day experience. There's only a handful of home games every year, and so you have to maximize what you do for those eight home games, let's say. And that's tough because you don't get the efficiencies and the scale that at Disney we would get, because we're entertaining guests 365. In this case, you're entertaining a lot of guests, maybe 8 weekends a year, and let's bring in a couple of big basketball games, maybe baseball games, depending on where you're at, or volleyball or wrestling matches, wherever it might be. But it's hard to gear your staff, your organizational design around entertaining, which is what events have turned into, because most athletic directors and their staff is appropriately focused on the student athlete experience. But it feels like we've outsourced a lot of the touch points to the consumer. And I think that's part of where athletic departments have kind of lost touch. It's they're having to focus so much on the key revenue drivers and the personalities within their university that it's very, very difficult to balance all those things. That's why when I was with Disney, we had so many different departments with so many really great people that it basically took everybody putting their oars in at the right time and rowing the right direction to make it work.
I like to say that fan engagement has two sides. It's firstly doing the right things, and then secondly doing things right, and they're not mutually inclusive. You're probably the best I've ever seen at doing things right. Talk about why that's so important.
Well, it's about it's about delivering on the promise, right? It's one thing to say you're going to have a good experience, but if you don't deliver on that, you end up falling short. So, the attention to detail is really, I think, what Disney did so well. We overmanaged where most people don't pay attention, and I think that overmanaging small details tends to get people to go, wow, I never thought about that. That was really a nice add or a nice feature. So I think if you take that down into, just classic project management, it's making sure you do things right, but then do things a little extra and add a little flair, a little Disney difference, a little magic on it. And people will remember that. Because I think we've all, I don't care where you're at now, the expectation of the consumer is higher than it's ever been. So if you don't get service, you right away you're trying to find the manager to see if that manager can get you the result you're looking for. So I think if you're able to create organizations and train people the right way, and they are very clear on what their why is in terms of exceeding guest expectations, it becomes a lot easier for organizations to work together.
I find so few organizations and events have the processes necessary for sustaining customer service excellence. How do you put in processes?
Oh, that's a great one. I think a lot of businesses are in survival mode, and I think the challenge that you have in college athletics, and we've seen it with several of our clients, is that they just don't have enough manpower to do everything they do. So they tend to accomplish something, and they don't take the time to look in the rearview mirror and say, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And how do we improve on it? So I think that's part of what you have to really, you have to architect these processes in. When when we were at Wide World of Sports, I mean, we were very fortunate to have so many opportunities come our way in so many different sports. But all sports aren't created equal. All events aren't created equal. So we had to put some rigor around that. That first step is that evaluation process. So I think you have to overmanage each step of the way. So we would have an event review committee, and putting together our game day action plan. And then we had a post-event review process that was very rigorous as well. As basically, this was the plan. How do we execute against it, and how do we improve on it? Where I think most organizations is they have a hard time looking in that rearview mirror. And so they end up tending to make the same mistakes over and again, or they don't leverage the opportunities that were exposed at that time. One could look at the food and beverage queues at any one of the QSRs or any one of the concession stands across the Disney property. And there is a real method to how fast you get somebody through there in an efficient way. And just saving seconds in queue time is going to bring more money to the bottom line. So it's just those little steps that you take in, whether it's using industrial engineers to, more efficiently design your queue, or it's great finance people who are really looking at how to improve processes.
I like to tell people it's never the bear in the woods, it's the mosquitoes. It's just all the little things. Let's switch gears for a moment and talk a little bit about Clancy Sports and sports tourism. Tell the listeners what you're doing in that arena.
Yeah, when I left Disney 5 years ago, and there was the one thing that Wide World of Sports did is we really kind of redefined youth sports tourism as we know it today. When we built it back in 1997, when we opened, it was the largest and still is the busiest sports complex in the world. But what we didn't realize was going to happen is it increased the volume of competition. When I started the New Orleans Sports Foundation back in 1988, there were really 12 to 15 cities in the country that had organizations whose purpose was to attract sporting events to their destination for the purposes of economic impact. I just left the National Association of Sports Commission annual symposium, and there were 1,000 people there, representing about 600 destinations across the country. So every small town in America has looked to sports, and specifically youth sports, to help drive incremental room nights in their own little marketplace, whether it's Sheboygan, Wisconsin, or Dallas, Texas. So what I'm doing right now is doing a lot of strategic planning with a lot of these organizations who are looking to understand how sports tourism works, to understand how their community needs to be organized and positioned, and what they need to do to go out there and attract it. And that starts with organization. Do you have the right facilities? Do you have the right commitment of the community? Do you have the right vision, the right mission? So I work through with them in a big way on that. I've also spent a lot of time now in helping, in some cases, municipalities, but now there's more private developers who are getting into the construction of youth sports facilities. So helping them on everything from design to how do you program it to how do you run it. And just having a great time basically leveraging those 20 years at Disney and helping other communities across the country.
Hey, before you leave us, I also want our listeners to know more about Threedimensional Sports. Tell everybody what that's all about.
Yeah, so I've just been so fortunate to be, like you, Rick. We've run across so many interesting people in this space. And about 6 years ago, one of my dearest friends, a guy by the name of Dr. Jeff Duke out of University of Central Florida, when he was doing his PhD work in coaching education, realized that the great coaches, the John Woodens of the world, what they had in common, and it was understanding there are three dimensions to greatness in coaching. And you could say that there's three dimensions in greatness in leadership or in teaching and anything you want to do. And for three-dimensional coaching, it starts off with you must be great in the physical side. So the first dimension is physical. the technical, tactical side. How do you run a practice? How do you manage games? Research shows that 85% of all coaches stop after that first dimension. The second dimension is really the mental or psychology side. How do I motivate Rick? How do I give Rick self-esteem? How do I create team cohesion? So a lot of those are psychological and mental aspects to the game. About another 10% of all coaches are able to do both 1 and 2. The third dimension is, how do I get to the heart of the athlete? How do I get to Rick to get him to give me another gear? And what we found is, all the research is, you really have to be a servant leader. It's got to be about Rick. It can't be about me and my record. And so I have to really care deeply about Rick. And so we ended up creating 24 modules in the second and third dimension. We don't worry about the first dimension at all. And so we've got these modules online in a learning platform. You can get college education. You get college 3 hours college credit with it. We have certificate programs. So we've launched this across the country and actually around the world with our third dimensional partner. Fellowship of Christian Athletes is our third dimensional partner. And what we were able to do is school districts, states coaching associations. We have some NGBs now that are using this, and it basically is, it gets to the point is, if you ask any coach why they coach, the majority of them will tell you, I want to make a difference in a kid's life. If you follow that up with a second question, how are you doing that? They scratch their head, because they realize everything they're doing is probably first dimensional coaching. And so it actually allows them to move from being a transactional coach to truly a transformational coach. So we've got a learning platform and trying to make a difference and bring fun back to sports in this country, for sure.
That's all great stuff. Well, Mike, thanks for joining us today from the bridge.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Let's close today with another On the Road with Rick. The collegiate athletic directors and support staff all belong to an organization called NACTA. These are the people that run college athletics except for the coaches. NACTA actually is an acronym for the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics. And NACTA is a big supporter of wounded warriors, which is appropriate to mention this Memorial Day week. I had the privilege of visiting the NACTA offices in Westlake, Ohio a few years back, and their executive director, my good friend Bob Vecchione, took me to Johnny's Restaurant in Cleveland. Johnny's is a classic old-school Italian place in an old home. And I ate what is still the single best dish I've ever eaten. And I've had a lot of great dishes around the world. I ate veal stuffed hot peppers. These are ground veal sausage stuffed in a banana pepper and smothered in the very best marinara sauce I've ever had. It's simply sublime. Had a chance to go back to Johnny's last year with our friends from Cleveland, Aaron and Laurie, and found that the stuffed peppers to be even better than ever. So put the original Johnny's on your bucket list and get the peppers. That's our show for this week. Check us out at fishbaitmarketing.com and let us know how we're doing. See you next week